it takes about at least 3 to 4 years for your plans to kind of come to fruition, right? For you to achieve a certain scale of growth that you're looking at. And then once you have achieved that, then obviously you would change your marketing plans to then align to the next growth phase, right?
Welcome to another episode of the Startup Operator. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to Devdutt Manay. Dev is an enterprise marketing leader, and the unique thing about Dev is that he has both demand gen and branding skills in equal measure. We spoke about his journey, his 10 years at CRM company Talisma, and then his transition to cloud telephony startup Exotel, and what he's learned along the way. Listen into this episode for some amazing insights on how you should run your campaigns and could be more effective. Hi Dev, welcome to the Startup Operator podcast.
Hi Carrie, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Pleasure to have you. So we'll start with your journey, right? In an era when people change jobs almost every couple of years or so, you spent 10 years at Talisma. What was that experience like? What got you to stay there for more than a decade?
Right. So I guess I have spent about 25 to 30% of my working life there. But it was a great learning experience. I joined Talisma right after I finished college. And most of what I have learned about the fundamentals of business or marketing is by learning on the job and by figuring out things as, the business grew. And to add to that, the CRM industry at that time was also witnessing a really exciting phase, right? Where customer experience was evolving into this hub around which all enterprise decisions would revolve. And
Right.
products rapidly moved from providing just, say, an email or a chat communication to multi-channel and then omnichannel communication, right? So there was a lot of action and there was a lot of learning. And the other thing that really helped me was when you spend significant time in a single organization, you get to experience the various phases of the business, right? That the phases that the business goes through. It could be the ups and downs. You get to see both of it. And so with this, you develop a very well-rounded perspective of how an organization starts or scales and, reaches the maturity stage. So I think this learning or this exposure was very beneficial for me at that time. And I had a lot of learning, through that phase.
Yeah, I mean, so I keep saying this to folks on my team as well, right? It takes a minimum of 3 to 4 years to really go through that cycle of momentum or efficiency, and then to see some
Right.
semblance of scale, right?
Of course.
And at each phases of this journey, there's a different sort of a learning, right? Initially, when you want to focus on momentum, it's all about how can you ship as soon as possible. Then in the efficiency scale, it's about building processes, making sure things are repeatable, adding predictability, so on and so forth, right? So
Right.
I mean, I'm sure that you would have seen different phases in that 10 to 14 year journey I think you spent at Talisma.
Right. Yeah. So I was there for about 10 years. And even if you look at a typical organizational plan or a strategy, it's long term, it looks at least 2 to 3 years into the future. So when we are building our marketing plans, we are kind of somewhere aligning with the same horizon. So as you rightly said, it takes about at least 3 to 4 years for your plans to kind of come to fruition, right? For you to
Yeah.
achieve a certain scale of growth that you're looking at. And then once you have achieved that, then obviously you would change your marketing plans to then align to the next growth phase, right? So this cycle has to happen over and over again. And I think that continuity is where the actual learning is, instead of just joining a company, say, spending 2 or 3 years and then moving on and doing the same thing, starting all over again. I mean, that's a different kind of a ball game, but I prefer rather to have a much long-term journey, because of the kind of exposure and the experience that you get.
Yeah. No, and I think the biggest kick is in also seeing some of the things that you predicted come to fruition, right? Whether it's market wise or how customers will respond, or product wise in terms of what they will require and so on. On a previous episode, I was talking to my colleague Harish, who spent about, I think, 18, 20 years at Microsoft. And the
Hmm.
way he saw that journey was through different projects, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah. And the other aspect of, marketing that you also experienced was that, you had to market in different geographies across the world, right? While also retaining your core messaging as such. So how do you contextualize your marketing for these different geographies?
So, just to bring some context, I've spent most of my time at mid-sized businesses who had achieved a certain product market fit and had an initial set of customers. And they were now looking to scale the business either via expansion into a new market, launching new products, or penetrating into a new vertical. The standard things you do to grow a business. So one of the first things that I would look at is how we can make the transition from an awareness stage to a thought leadership stage in the market, right?
Hmm.
And by thought leadership, I don't mean building just a white paper, but it's a long-term dedication to helping customers solve their challenges via innovation, right?
Right.
So thought leadership, the way I see it, is an ongoing activity with feedback loops from the market, right? And I give this process about 6 to 8 months, since there is a lot of work that needs to be done internally to achieve this. You would have to do various things like gaining an in-depth analysis into the industry to discover new use cases, setting up new processes that caters to that specific market, in terms of the regional nuances, that you have to cater to, and then also training the team on specific aspects of the product. And to do all this, you need to develop a very well-rounded perspective, right? Which starts with researching the market, understanding the competition, gauging the addressable market size, and then coming up with a great story that brings your competitive advantage to the fore. And when we talk about competitive advantage, in most cases, it's probably just a slide, but there's a lot of work that needs to put behind that slide. And there's a lot of research that you need to put in understanding the customer, in understanding how they behave, what they do, where they consume information, what are their top priorities, what are their some of their initiatives like digital transformation initiative. What can you do? How do you align closely to that? So you have to ride on a few of these things and basically develop this entire perspective, and then you drive this perspective within the rest of the organization, right, to the other teams.
Right.
Because marketing plays a very critical role in go to market, and it is essential to get that initial traction right, because the whole organization, including sales and product and engineering, everybody is relying on you to give them the inputs from the market. So I think the more time you spend understanding the market, understanding your consumer, I think you would be able to better arrive at contextualizing the understanding of the product market for different geographies. And then eventually this would reflect in your content assets, your event PPTs, your prospect meetings, where now you will be able to have meaningful conversations because you've spent that time in building this research and understanding of the market and the customer persona.
No, I mean, a lot of what you said really makes sense because, I've been guilty of this as well, that, we delve too much on the tactical things. A lot of times, I mean, in terms of, hey, I mean, let's maybe participate in that event, or uh, let's start doing some content marketing and stuff like that. But
Right.
what I've seen is beneficial as well is to take a step back and really analyze the market, talk to as many prospects or customers as possible, and really have a perspective on that market, right? A well-defined perspective uh, to, you know, that can sort of be your positioning per se, right? Not just simply some kind of watered down communication that has worked for you elsewhere.
Of course, and as you said, positioning is extremely critical. Because that is a starting point, and in most cases, it's make or break situation, right? You're entering a new market, you're spending a lot of money on branding, on demand generation, on various sort of activities. You're trying to build the partner network, and this is really the starting point, which can make or break, or rather, kind of have a significant impact on the effectiveness of your overall presence, in that market or that geo. So I will again reiterate that research is very important. Understanding the nerve of the customer is probably paramount and should be the key starting point in your go-to-market journey.
So how do you structure your teams internally to be able to, get that kind of feedback and insights from the market?
So the way we have structured here is slightly different. So with enterprise marketing, we not just bring in the leads, but we work more on a demand generation kind of a model, right? In the true sense, wherein we, all of us obviously are involved in research. We have divided the team by verticals and by geographies that we operate in. And then once we have the research with us, then we identify as to what will be the best channel, to reach out to these customers based on where and how they consume information. And then we work on the messaging aspect. And then, after the actual outreach, once we get these interests, we don't hand it over right over to sales at that point. So we engage with them, we engage with these prospect conversations. We have about a couple of meetings, try to understand what the requirement is. And I think this process is what gives us the edge, as compared to other teams, because we are spending significant time in having this first conversation with the customer, where the customer is also not completely aware about the product, right? So he's asking a lot of information. And with enterprise marketing, it's more listening to the customer than talking and telling him what to do. Because at large enterprises, there will be some sort of customization that is required. There is integration that needs to be done. The processes are very unique, from other enterprises, even within the same segment or the same vertical. So this kind of helps us understand. So we'll spend a lot of time listening to the customer and then go back to whiteboarding and then figure out how can we design our solution to solve his specific problem, right? And then we prepare pitch decks and send it to them. And once we have qualified them on the band qualification, only then it moves to sales. So we have not just brought them onto the top of the funnel, but we have taken them all the way down. And this entire journey from the top of the funnel to say the mid or the bottom is very seamless and very frictionless, because we have put in a lot of effort even before this lead comes into the funnel, right? Via research or via relevant content, engaging them at through an email, and then at an event followed by a newsletter. So we have nurtured this lead. So this helps the lead to kind of move or accelerate very quickly through the pipeline. So it's very frictionless in that sense. So that is something that we very consciously do.
Right. And also considering that, you've largely focused on enterprise deals, large ACV and so on. So marketing doesn't just end at lead generation, but also requires significant nurture and branding and so on and so forth to kind of really move that forward, right? Move that down to the bottom of the funnel, as you said.
Right. So the focus is, as you said, in some cases it would be evangelizing if it's a new product in a certain vertical, or it would be changing the positioning, and bringing more of a competitive advantage if it's a mature market. And then you come up with a very targeted and personalized approach. But branding is a great way to attract your audience, but it has to be done in a measured fashion. And I think somewhere digital kind of takes the lead in this, because now it's possible to experiment in real time, with different budgets, with different audience across geos. And also working with complementing products on joint branding is a great way to reach your audience with minimal budgets,
right,
and combined value proposition. But all branding exercise, I feel, has to be very customer centric. Gone are those days of generic spending and kind of spreading the net wide.
Yeah.
The customer has become more aware, more smarter, more tech savvy. So your branding needs to be extremely relevant for it to be productive.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? So branding has to be sort of an omnichannel experience where it all comes together on multiple different platforms or experiences for a customer. And it has to be tied to some sort of a metric, right? I mean, it can't just be that, hey, I put out an ad in the newspaper or, I put out a hoarding somewhere and that should probably help us get X, Y, or Z deals
Right.
this quarter. Yeah. So the other thing is that, I mentioned omni-channel experience. There are so many channels for a marketer, right? I mean, we're really spoiled for choice that way, from events and PR to digital and affiliate and whatever, whatnot. How do you pick your channels along the customer's buying journey?
Right. So, especially particularly with enterprise marketing or account-based marketing, it needs an integrated marketing approach where you leverage different channels, as you mentioned, along the customer journey. Now, this differs from the kind of industry and the stakeholder that you're targeting, and hence it is very essential to understand the buyer persona, right? Where does he consume information from? Let's say which magazines he reads, which newsletter he subscribes to. So, for example, an IT head in a BFSI, would be more comfortable with an in-person meeting at an event, while a product manager at an e-commerce company is more accessible over LinkedIn or an email, right? So, channel identification stems from a strong persona understanding. So you could start with an email, meet in person at an event, and nurture them through newsletters. But all along, sticking to a content delivery plan that is in line with his or her priorities. And when I say his or her priorities, it's basically understanding what is the role that this persona is playing within the organization, right? And you have to align your messaging to help him achieve those roles and responsibilities which he's taken care of. And for a successful multi-channel campaign, it has to be, whether there are three or four things that I measure it on. It has to be well orchestrated, which means there should be a sequential flow to your outreach, right?
Right.
You need to have visibility into how you're going to engage with this particular contact or a POC or a stakeholder over the next 2 to 3 months time, right? At least it should be planned and documented somewhere. Then there has to be a sustained period of time, over which this campaign is run with regular iterations. And the third piece is obviously great content. It gives you better results, and the content also has to graduate, as the customer advances through his journey. Now, for example, you cannot give the same content at sign up and the same content for sales when they are going and meeting a customer in advanced stages, right?
Yeah.
So the sign up content may talk about product and pricing, whereas sales enablement must have literature showcasing the ROI and the cost benefit analysis. So that is a key differentiation that we need to make.
Right. I also want to talk about a transition, right? Talisma is a mid-sized company. Exotel is a startup. I'm sure, you would have built out a lot of these processes and your teams would have matured at Talisma. What was it like to start up from scratch at Exotel? What was the challenge like?
Mhm. It was challenging in the beginning, no doubt, but I kind of enjoyed that. It was like being put at the wheel of a car moving at say 100 kilometers per hour, and now you have to learn to drive and maintain the speed at the same time.
Steer it in the right direction also.
Yeah. So it's a tough balance, but getting your hands dirty early on helps with accelerating the learning curve. And along with that, being a marketer, obviously you don't have to come in and make big changes, but you need to have a certain lineup of well thought through campaigns, right? Based on your initial understanding, which you can execute early on, right? So at one end, you are learning about the organization, the processes, the product, and the market. And at the other end, you are also kind of conceptualizing and lining up these campaigns, which you can roll out, as soon as possible. And some may fail, right? It's obvious. But it's always better to learn early than to wait till you're 100% sure, which I never think you would be. So the idea is to ship it out as soon as possible and just learn from it very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, not wait for processes to take shape, but rather execute hard and allow it to sort of organically form, right? But always
Right.
be cognizant of that. The other facet of your experience is also that you've operated in sort of crowded markets, I could say, like CRM or cloud telephony.
Mhm.
In these markets, again, how do you differentiate yourself and avoid your product being seen as a commodity as such?
Right. So we've had some good customer logos, across verticals and markets. So we obviously leveraged our understanding of those use cases to penetrate deeper into those verticals or markets. But for new verticals, building a deeper understanding of the industry helped us a lot to make the messaging more relevant and specific. And with enterprises, it's all about value-based marketing, right? So you have to combine the clarity of your value proposition with the right individual or persona in your target account, right? So the more clear you are about your value proposition, the better your positioning is, and then your identification of the right person or POC. If you bring these two together, then that's when the magic happens. And in addition to this, we use some practical things, like we have commissioned surveys with publications who had a strong hold in the verticals we were targeting, and explored ways in which we could make use of other vehicles in the industry, such as your analyst or trade bodies. But by and large, the idea is always to play to our strengths and highlight some of the innovation we've had in terms of helping customers either comply with regulations, or another great example is free discovery call with prospects. A lot of them, especially if the product is new and they kind of have it somewhere in their roadmap, they want to learn more about the product, and giving them a free discovery session for about a couple of hours at their office site, really helps them understand more about the product. And also you get to build a very, personal rapport with these decision makers, which then, goes to your nurture phase, and, the rest of the marketing activities follows. And
Right.
things like ISO certifications among us. So these are all elements that you need to have as a part of the internal preparedness. When you're going out and targeting in a highly commoditized market, you need to have as many differentiators as possible. So, and it eventually boils down to having a very great, positioning story, which combines all these different elements.
Right. Right. And just by nature of having to work on enterprise deals, especially, you have to work extremely closely with sales, right? And sales and marketing don't always get on the same page. So any tips that you have on aligning more closely with sales teams?
I think it goes without saying, it's extremely, extremely important, and I won't stop at sales. I would say even product, right? And marketing can no longer afford to work in silos, because there is tremendous competition in the market. And the only way to get ahead is to combine and consolidate the sales and marketing efforts, right? And with this, you are making the whole process more effective, and also building agility internally to respond to a fast changing market. And in doing this, regular cadence help. I think that should be the first starting point, right? Let's don't break your head trying to set up, processes for interaction and collaboration. All that is fine, but I think you should start with a regular cadence. Cadence which
Yeah.
everyone attends. In the first place, both from marketing and sales. So the first step is to talk more often. Don't wait for formal setup to share updates, and most importantly, don't hold back any information. Make the information flow as seamless as possible, between marketing, sales, and product. And yeah, I think that should be a great starting point. Just talk more often.
Yeah, I mean it's it's kind of a no-brainer, but I mean somehow seems to slip through the cracks because each one is doing their own thing. But look, I mean, if you look at a campaign, right, there are two things that broadly you can optimize. One is the sourcing, and second is the engagement, right? And
Mhm.
of course, I mean there are 1,000 elements in between and around, but you're not going to tweak your sourcing in silos or your engagement in silos, right?
Yeah.
So either the top of the funnel or the bottom of the funnel, you ought to be talking to your sales and marketing folks on the same page, if not on a weekly basis, at least on a fortnightly basis, to understand,
Mhm.
hey, how can I improve my campaigns to generate better quality leads, or how can I improve my engagement so that these things move faster through the funnel, right?
Of course. And once you start doing this, right,
Yeah,
I think both sales and marketing need to see some sort of a response from the market, right? Once you start doing this and you close a deal, jointly,
yeah,
and then you get some more information from that, you pump that to product, and or you make changes to the pricing structure, right? These are all learnings for sales as well. And there's a lot of learning for us in terms of,
yeah,
as you rightly mentioned, what is a typical sales queries or questions that the sales get, right? So how can we address some of them in the marketing stage itself,
yeah.
even before they come to the funnel? So once we see all these activities coming together and having a positive impact on the market, then I think it will just be a second nature for sales and marketing to collaborate more and more, right? But that
Absolutely.
process has to start somewhere, at some point.
Yeah.
And I think regular cadence is very, very important.
No, absolutely. And, it also comes down to what marketing really thinks of its goals, right? I've talked to plenty of marketing teams that just want to give MQLs to their, sales teams and be done with it,
Mm,
right?
mm.
Uh, uh, Fine, you could do that, but then those MQLs have to matter, right? At the end of the day, you have to move the needle for the company, and any metric
Right,
that you are going to commit to has to be a proxy for revenue at the end of the day. So
right.
yeah, interesting. And I've seen this, as you mentioned, I mean, I've seen this give ROI in a matter of days and weeks, right?
Hmm.
It's such a it's such an obvious thing. Yeah. So all right, Dave. Let's do a rapid fire round. I mean, nothing scandalous as such.
Sure.
So just some quick
I,
answers
I
to
believe you.
just some quick answers to the following questions. Uh,
Okay.
The best marketing campaign you've seen executed?
Mm, I think I like the some of the IBM campaigns,
Yeah.
just by the pure nature of the scale at which they have to manage this and across geographies and markets. So I think the engine behind that is really massive, and the scale at which they operate. So I think some of the IBM or even the Oracle campaigns, large enterprise campaigns,
Yeah.
and then the beauty about that is these campaigns are the content is very heavily driven by internal SMEs, right? The subject matter experts.
Hmm.
So they try to make it as relevant as possible, and but at the same time keeping it very region specific. So I think some of those campaigns I like.
Yeah. No, I mean, one of my favorite campaigns of all time is IBM's line in the 80s, which said, "Nobody ever got fired buying an IBM."
Right,
Right?
right, of course.
I mean, hit the nail on the head. So, all right, moving on to the second question. One thing your boss told you that you can never forget.
Don't worry, it'll work.
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
yeah. Sometimes it's just the simplest things, but I guess the timing matters, right? When you're
yeah, I know it works. And when you are executing, let's say, large events and things like that, there are so many variables, right? Anything
yeah,
can go wrong.
yeah,
And since you are so closely associated with it, you are not coming out of that and looking at the broader picture. You are just thinking about 100 items at any given point in time.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
very difficult. It's very important to take a step back, and just let things be, and just like focus on some of the most critical aspects. So, but
right,
yeah, I think it's just the nature of the work.
yeah. Okay, something you wish you knew when you started out in marketing.
I think probably digital marketing, though it was very early at that time because I started in 2005, and I think Twitter came in 2007 or 8, so it
Yeah,
was pretty new back then. But I think digital marketing has really grown to a completely different level, right, as compared to the traditional marketing channels, and there is still such a long way to go.
yeah,
So someone who joins, who gets into marketing now, obviously, first and the most important thing to know is digital marketing. That's where things start. So probably when I started, if digital was at those stages where I could learn a little better, little early on, I think that I would have liked.
right, right. Uh, Something you wish you knew before you started out at Exotel.
The pace at which things run,
Hmm.
right? Because see, the growth is a focus of all the organizations, but then it's also at what pace that you want to grow, right? And the entire organization has to align with that. And it's like, as I gave, sitting at the wheel example. You're just put in there, and you have to figure things out on our own. But that has its own benefits, of course. But then I think some experience in handling that sort of pace would have helped.
Yeah, I mean, you can never prepare for that pace, really. I mean,
Yeah,
it's something that you just have to live and experience. I don't think you can ever prepare for that pace.
right.
Yeah. The best quarantine hack.
I think taking a forced break
Yeah.
uh, from working, I think that's a must. There's absolutely no demarcation
Yeah.
between work life and
Work
personal life.
just
Yeah,
bleeds into personal life now.
right,
So,
right, right.
yeah,
So I think figuring out a way to just break that chain sometime in the evening, probably going for a run and just giving that gap that is needed to shift back to your personal life.
sure. Yeah, I agree with that as well. What book are you reading right now, or what book would you recommend to people?
I'm reading this book called Deep Thinking by Gary Kasparov.
Oh, okay.
Um, it's about how he was beaten by an IBM machine. I think this was 1997, in a chess game. So
Hmm.
he talks about that journey of computers and their quest to beating humans at chess, and how that has evolved to beating humans at Go, and where the next frontier
Yeah,
lies. So he shares all his experiences, and I think he's one of the few guys who has as I say, if you can't beat them, join them. So he has joined the cause of the machines. So he has a very interesting perspective to share in the book.
Yeah, I know there's a phenomenal documentary on AlphaGo actually.
Right, right,
I mean, you're just rooting for that human guy, right, to succeed.
right.
Yeah, sign of times to come. I mean, seriously, I don't know what's going to happen when the machines take over.
Yeah, but I think in the end, the human wins, right? Anyways.
Let's hope so. Let's hope that remains.
Yeah.
So, uh, any podcast that you listen to and that you recommend as well? Of course, this one is something that goes without saying.
That goes without saying, yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
Uh, I'm not much of a podcast guy, but from whatever I've heard, I think I like Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no time limit, so it's like a massive brainstorming session,
Yeah.
and it's just like a free flowing, thing of train of thoughts. So I like that format, and he has some really amazing people on the podcast. So
Yeah.
that is the one I would highly recommend.
He just struck a $100 million deal with Spotify, by the way.
Yeah. So that's,
Yeah,
I
amazing.
mean, imagine he's gone from where to where, right? From doing podcasts on YouTube to now $100 million.
From Fear Factor, dude. Remember, I mean, he was the host of the Fear Factor. And from Fear Factor.
Right. Oh, now I remember. That's what I was thinking. I've seen him somewhere.
Yeah.
Correct. Oh, damn.
He wasn't completely bald that time.
Yeah, so, now I remember.
Yeah, so from Fear Factor to MMA to podcasting to, yeah.
Yeah, because in his bio, they always say MMA commentator and things like that, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So I was always thinking that, this guy looks very familiar. Okay, now I know.
Yeah. All right, Dev, this has been a fascinating conversation, a lot of insights that we've uncovered. Certainly will be helpful for all of the people who are listening to this.
I really hope so.
No, I know so. So, to round this episode, what do you have coming up, and any words of advice for marketers who are listening to this and are executing in times of COVID, right? Which is not definitely not an easy time to be a marketer. So, any words of advice?
Spend some time on building customer centricity within the marketing org. Because in times like this, I think it's not very advisable to be salesy in your messaging, right?
Yeah.
So having some bit of customer centricity definitely helps. Spend time with product teams, spend time with sales teams, get to understand the customer better. And then, the whole process of building content pieces and everything that can follow. But I think this phase will give us a lot of lessons and learning on how to manage and handle future situations that may arise of a similar nature. So I think an understanding of the customer is probably the need of the hour for everyone in the organization.
Absolutely. Fantastic note to end the podcast on. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and definitely we should do a follow-up sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Gary. It was lovely talking to you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Startup Operator. Every weekend, we'll interview operators at fast-growing startups and curate insights that can help you do better. This podcast is available on all popular platforms. If you like our content, don't forget to subscribe and share. Thank you. Until next time, put your head down and execute.